Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm Marcus from IMSEC Governance and we're a UK-based cybersecurity company who specialise in the certification of businesses to Cyber Essentials Basic and Cyber Essentials Plus, and if required, ISME Cyber Assurance as well. For any businesses who are registered outside the UK, we also offer ISME Cyber Baseline certification as well, which is like a version of Cyber Essentials but for international based companies. Today's video is all about how to answer the Cyber Essentials questionnaire. Now this is based upon the Montpellier question set, which is the current question set out at the time of recording, and this is July 2024. You can download the Cyber Essentials questionnaire set from the ISME website, so you can go through and actually work along the questions before actually going for submission. And I'll stick a link to the questionnaire link and stuff like that below the video, so you can just download it and go from there. Now this questionnaire set does come in both PDF and Excel formats for you to have a look at. Now something to be aware of is that the question set is generally updated every year or so. So what is current now might change in the future. And when it comes to Cyber Essentials certifications, please bear in mind that it is a point in time assessment. So what you enter in as your question on the day of submission is how it gets marked. If something changes the next day or the next month, we don't take that into account. You wait until the certification comes around again in 12 months' time. Now, if you do submit your assessment and the assessor knocks it back for more information and you resubmit it, you must make sure that your information has been kept up to date, because times might have changed and then you might have to resubmit and verify version numbers and such. It is also recommended that before going ahead with your Cyber Essentials questionnaire, that you take a look at the Cyber Essentials Requirements for IT Infrastructure document, which is available from the NCSC website. This document covers all the information that you need to know about the 5 technical controls for Cyber Essentials and explains how to actually implement them, what's it looking for and stuff like that. So again, I'll stick a link in below the video in the description so you can actually download that document and go from there. Now if you haven't actually looked at this document yet, make sure you look at it straight after this video. It's helpful actually just telling you how to implement stuff, what the Cyber Essentials scheme is looking for, what the controls are, how to actually implement them and go from there. Now if you're looking to follow through this video by filling in the questionnaire from either the Excel version or via the portal, we'll be covering every single question in the scheme. But be aware that some of the questions are not visible on the portal unless you answer a question in a specific way. So we'll be covering a lot of questions. Some of them may or may not be available for you, so just bear that in mind as you go through it. Now an important point to remember when filling in the questionnaire is that if a question asks for a yes or no answer, you only have to put yes or no in. You can put a little bit of information in, but you don't have to. Now if a question says describe how you do this or explain how you do this, you must put some information in explaining or describing how you do that procedure or that event. If you don't, the assessor is going to knock it back, ask for more information, and then you're going to have to resubmit. Any answers that have software listed against it should have version numbers and should be supported and up to date. So web browsers, operating systems, third-party applications should all have version numbers. So with that, let's get started. Now the first few questions in the assessment are all about your business and business type. So we're going to skip these first few questions and then we'll get on from the meaty questions. So moving on to question A 1.7. If the application is a renewal or an existing certification, is it the first time you've applied for certification? Question is, as it says, if it's a first time assessment or a first time certification that you're going for, yes, it's in the first one. If you've already had Cyber Essentials in the past, then it's a renewal. Even if your certification's expired in the past, it'll still be a renewal. So just answer it accordingly. Question A 1.8, what is your primary reason for applying certification? Well, here you just need to say why you apply for Cyber Essentials. Is it tendering? Is it for best practices? Is it for a requirement? And put it in there. Then we have question A 1.8.1. What is the secondary reason for applying for certification? So here you just need to add another reason why you're going for certification. So NCSC and Cyber Essentials just wants to see 2 reasons why you're going for Cyber Essentials. It's a bit of information gathering for them. A 1.9. This question is asking, have you read the Cyber Essentials Requirements for IT Infrastructure document? So as we stated before, this document tells you how to apply the controls within the business to comply with Cyber Essentials, and it should be read before actually going for certification. So do make sure that you actually read it and then mark the answer accordingly. A 1.10, this question asks if ISME can contact you if you suffer from a data-related breach or a cyber-related breach. It's just a simple yes or no answer. If you don't want to talk to ISME if you have a breach, say no. Now moving on to the scoping of the assessment, this can be a bit of a confusing area for some people. The first question is A 2.1, does the scope of this assessment cover your whole organisation? Now by default for Cyber Essentials, it really wants you to say yes, cover the whole organisation for certification, because it just makes it easier. However, if you've got different locations or international sites which aren't going to be part of the Cyber Essentials certification, you can actually exclude them. Or if you've got some legacy systems which need to be excluded because they're not being supported and maintained, you can exclude these areas or networks as well. So if you entered in no to A2.1, there's a previous one, question A2.2 will appear in the portal, and you can add in a description of what you'd like to be for the scope of the assessment. Now this will be listed on your certificate, and you should say something like whole organization excluding development network, or whole organization excluding legacy network, something like that. Something general, but generally the scoping should be around network-based sort of things like that, and descriptive. So when people look at your certificate, they know what it's actually in scope and what you've been certified against. A2.3, this question asks you, describe the locations of the business. So for example, here you're going to put all UK offices, or A2.4. This question is asking all about the assets and scope of the assessment. For basically all of your laptops, your desktops, you bring your own devices or BYODs. Here you need to list the quantity of the devices you have, and the operating systems, and the version, and the editions. So if you've got Windows, for example, you'd say 10 times HP, Windows 10 Pro 22H2, 5 times macOS running Simona. A2.4.1 is asking if you are running any thin clients. If you are, list them. If you're not, just write none. A2.5 is asking you, please list all of your servers which are within the business. So this is going to include physical, virtual, cloud-based, so things like that. So here we're looking for things like 5 times Windows Server 2022, 3 times Ubuntu 2204, AXXI Server 7.03, and so forth. A2.6 is asking about any tablets or mobile devices that are in scope and have access to business data and services. And if so, you've got to list the quantity of them, the operating system version, and things like that. So here you're going to have to add maybe something like 5 times iOS 17, 6 times Samsung running Android 14, and such like that. Now, if any personal devices have access to email, those are also in scope. So bring your own devices are in scope for that question. A2.7 is asking about listing your networks in scope for the assessment. So ideally, it should be something like the main office network, but you should also include home networks by simply listing home networks if you do have any home users, and also add any cloud-based networks. So if you use Amazon or Azure, Google networks for infrastructure, add them as well. A2.7.1 asks if you've got any home workers. So for a home worker, it's pretty much anyone who works at home for more than 50% of the time with the business. So if they do, you've got to list how many users there are. A2.8 is asking to list your network equipment. So list your firewall and your routers for the business. Now, any ISP provided equipment for home users is not in scope and doesn't have to be listed, but you should ensure that you list the make and the model of your equipment for this answer. Question A2.9 is asking you to list all the cloud services in use with the business. So if you're using Microsoft 365, Google, Amazon AWS, Azure, Xero, things like that, you've got to list all that. Anything that is cloud-based, you have to list if it's got access to business services information. A2.10 is asking you for the name and the job role of the person who is responsible for managing the IT systems within your business. So this needs to be someone in the business and not an outsourced IT provider and things like that. So you've got to have that primary point of contact within that business. And just make sure you list the name and the job role. So we move on to the next section. So the next section is about insurance. So the Cyber Essentials scheme comes with 3 cyber liability insurance if your business is domiciled within the UK and has a turnover of less than £20 million. Now you will get up to £25,000 cover, but it's free, you can take it. So if you want it, just say yes. If you don't want that cyber liability insurance, just say no. The next section is all about firewalls. So every laptop, server, desktop, every type of device should have a firewall turned on and configured at all times, regardless if it's in the business or outside the business, such as at home, on a client site, in a coffee shop and stuff like that. You should always have a firewall turned on each device. Question A4.1 asks whether you have firewalls at the boundary of your office network. That's separated against the internal network and the internet. So, pretty much you connect your network, you go to the internet. Do you have one? This should be a yes, but if you're a home worker, then you don't have to include your ISP home router or anything like that, because that's out of scope, and you will rely upon your software firewall that is on your computer. Question A4.1.1 is asking you, how do you actually protect the devices when you're not in the office? So basically, what happens if you've got staff that have laptops at home or on customer site or out? Stuff like that, in a hotel, how do they actually safeguard that? Do they use VPNs? Do they just rely upon a firewall? what other measures and controls have they got in place? And you just need to list them there. A4.2 is making sure that when you first get a router or a firewall, you change the default password to something more secure. So if you don't do this, you should do this now, but pretty much as soon as you get a new piece of equipment for your firewall or router, you should go in, change the password to something more complex. A4.2.1 is asking you to describe what process is for changing the firewall password. You should write down the steps here. For example, you log into the device, you go to the admin account, you change the account, you save it, you log out, and things like that. Question A4.3 is asking you how the firewall meets the requirements for password-based authentication, which is mentioned in the Cyber Essentials requirements for IT infrastructure document that we've already discussed. So you need to select one of the options that's in there and listed on the thing. So it'd either be A, B, C, or D. Now, if you select option D, you have to stick some information in to explain your reasoning behind option D. Question A4.4 wants to know that if you know or suspect that a firewall password has been compromised, is it changed? This should be of an obvious yes, but you need to put a little bit of information in and just say, yes we do, blah blah blah. Question 8.5, this question is asking you if you have any services which are enabled that can be accessed externally from the internet or from inside your own network. So are you allowing any traffic in from the firewall that isn't by default? So for example, VPNs, which are virtual private networks, email systems, so mail, SMTP. Then if you don't have any services allowed through, just simply say no. So A4.5.1, so if you mentioned yes to the previous one and you left a description in the previous question, then it's going to ask you, do you have a documented business case for allowing these services through your firewall? Now ideally it should be a yes, you should have that change control in place. So if you haven't got any documented processes in place, write them up and then agree to this question here and say, yes, you do have a documented business case for it. It's also good for best practices. So A4.6, if you do have services enabled on the firewall from previous question, then do you have a process for removing or disabling the firewall rules if they're no longer required? So again, this is coming back to change control, best practice management firewalls, and you just have to state the process to disable or remove the firewall rules if no longer required. Hopefully it's all through change control and stuff like that. So A4.7 is saying, are all your firewalls at the boundary of the internet and your network configured to block all services from being advertised to the internet? Basically it's saying, are all your firewalls configured to block everything and only allow what you absolutely need, that we've kind of previously discussed about. Now if you have anything open, then obviously there should be a documented business case. And this should be a yes, so blocking everything. A4.8, this question is asking if your boundary firewalls are configured to allow configuration access over the internet. So if you've got any administration portals that are exposed to the internet which allow external people to access your firewall, they should be blocked, locked down. Or if you've got something like Meraki devices, which have a cloud portal, then that's that as well. Obviously, if you don't have that exposed, then you can just say no. A4.9 is asking if you answered yes to the previous question, the question is then asking, do you have another documented business case for allowing this? Hopefully you have. If you haven't, you need to write one up to say why you do it and go from there. Question A4.10. Again, if you answer to the previous question to A4.8, this question is asking you, how do you safeguard your firewall from possible attack? So is it via trusted IP addresses, multi-factor authentication, and so forth? So how are you restricting access to that administrative portal on the firewall? Question A4.11. Do you have a software firewall enabled on all your laptops, servers, desktops, and so forth? Now this should be a yes, and it should be enabled, and it should be configured for continuous running and going from there. If you use cloud servers or host servers for production, these servers should also have firewalls enabled as well and going from there. Now Cyber Essentials likes the default operating system based firewalls by default, but there's nothing stopping you from using a firewall from a third party. So question A4.12, if you said no to the previous question, it's asking, is this because the operating system you're using doesn't have a firewall by default? Now, if this is the case, you just need to list the operating system that you're using that doesn't actually support firewalls by default. Now, this is fairly rare these days that you don't get an operating system that doesn't support a firewall. So we move on to the next section, which is all about secure configuration. So for question A5.1, where you're able to do so, have you disabled or removed all the software and services that you don't need to use on the computer? So here you just need to describe, how do you do this? So for this question, you're going to be describing, do you remove all the trial and bloat software off a brand new computer? You remove all this, or maybe you use a gold image that you deploy and use for everyone else like that. So you just need to make sure and list exactly how you get rid of all the stuff that you don't need and use. Question A5.2 is asking, do you only use accounts which are needed for the computers? So if user accounts which are old and no longer used, they should all be disabled and should be removed off computers, and computers should only have accounts enabled and used that are required to do the work. So they should only have valid accounts enabled, pretty much. So it's a bit of like housekeeping and removing old accounts from your computers. Question A5.3 is asking, have you changed the default password for all user and administrative accounts for all devices? So this should be a yes, but if you haven't, go through, do that now. All default accounts and administrative accounts should be changed. Question A5.4, do you run any external services that provide access to data that shouldn't be made public to users across the internet? Now this could be a mail server, a VPN server, some form of cloud service offering or something like that. So if you do, just say yes. If you don't, say no. A5.5 is saying if you answered yes to the previous question, then this question wants you to select either options A, B, C or D. And again, if you select option D, you just need to put a bit of information in why you selected option D. Question A5.6 wants you to actually describe the process you have in place for changing passwords on your systems when you believe they've been compromised. So if you find that a user account has been compromised, what's the process for changing the passwords? Hopefully you've got that in place. Question A5.7, when you're not using multi-factor authentication, how do you protect your systems from external brute force attacks? Is it via the throttling of passwords? Is it through the locking of accounts after 10 unsuccessful attempts? Or is it something else that you need to describe in the answer? Again, the IT requirements document that we've already discussed talks about these various processes that you can use. Question A5.8, should be an easy one for these days, but is auto-run, autoplay disabled on all these systems? So all systems pretty much have these disabled these days, but basically if you plug a USB device into your computer, does it automatically start and run an application, or does it block or prompt you? Ideally, it should block and prompt you, and you should have auto-run, autoplay disabled for the correct answer. Question A5.9 is asking you, do all machines ask you to log on before you do anything? So all devices, no matter what they are, that are in scope, should require you to log in before you do anything. So you got that username and password screen, you've got to log in and do something. You can't just log straight into the computer. Question A5.10, what is the method to unlock your devices? So here, is it biometrics, is it password, is it PIN number? How do you unlock your devices? And then we move on to the next section, which is security update management. So question A6.1 is asking, are all the operating systems which are in scope and supported by a manufacturer to provide security updates? So this also includes routers and firewalls if listed in the assessment. So pretty much, are all the operating systems kept up to date and supported? A6.2 is asking, are all your software which are installed in your computers kept up to date as well and maintained by a supplier? So here, is your Zoom, your Adobe, your Java, your .NET, all those third-party applications, are they supported? Are they kept up to date and supported and maintained by a manufacturer? A6.2.1, here you need to list all the web browsers that you're using within the business, and they should be up to date. You should include the version numbers as well. So here, if you use Edge, if you use Safari, Firefox, Chrome, things like that, you need to list those, list the version numbers, and make sure they're kept up to date within that 14-day patch window. Question A6.2.2 is asking you, what type of anti-malware software are you using? By default, Cyber Essentials recommends that you use the built-in operating system version of the antivirus. So for Windows, you're looking at Windows Defender. On a Mac, you're looking at XProtect. But there's nothing stopping you from using a third-party application. And if you do, list the version number against it as well, just so the assessor knows if it's supported, if it's current and stuff like that. Question A6.2.3 is asking you to list the email applications that you use on your computer. So for instance, are you using Outlook, are you using a web-based client or anything like that? So you just need to list those. A6.2.4 is asking you to list all the Office applications that are used to create organizational data and list the versions as well. So here, are you using Google Workspace, Office 365, stuff like that? What are you using? LibreOffice? A6.3 is asking you whether all of your software is licensed. Now, obviously this should be a yes, you should be using licensed software. A6.4, this question is asking you whether all your high and critical security updates are being applied to all your operating systems. Now this includes laptops, desktops, bring your own devices, servers, virtual servers, and such like that. So all high and critical updates should be applied within 14 days. A6.4.1 is asking you if auto updates are enabled and configured on your machines for the operating system. Now this helps to ensure that all your updates are applied and compliant with Cyber Essentials. So any operating systems, if you can, enable auto updates. A6.4.2, this question will appear if you said no to the previous question. So it's just saying if auto updates are not being used, how do you ensure that your updates are being applied within the 14 days to your computers? Now this is purely for the high and critical security updates. Question A6.5 is a similar question here, but our security updates apply to your applications. So here we're thinking about Zoom, Office and things like that, Java, Adobe. And then we've got A6.5.1. So again, if auto updates are not configured on all your applications, how do you support it? How do you update them? Then A6.5.2, where you aren't using auto updates in the applications, how do you ensure that they are being kept up to date? Is it manually downloading the updates? Are you using remote management software and such? Question A6.6. So this question is asking you, have you removed any software that is no longer supported or maintained by the manufacturer? So if it's no longer supported or receiving security updates, you should be removing this software or upgrading to a more recent version. So for example, an old version of Office 2010 would have to be removed and updated with a more recent version. Question A6.7. If you're a business and you need to use the old or out-of-date software, for example embedded operating systems inside machines, have you moved them out of scope? So here they're thinking, if you've got an out-of-date operating system that you need to use, you have to put it onto a subset, onto a separate network that is firewalled off and doesn't have access to the internet. Then we move on to the next section, which is user access control. So this is a bit of a short section for you. So 8.7, here you need to describe the process for authorizing account creation. So how are user accounts created, who authorizes them, and describe the process. So for example, is it a case someone gets brought on, HR inform IT, IT set the account up, inform the user, and go from there. A7.2 asks you, are all your user accounts unique? Here it's asking, has everyone got a unique username and unique password? For Cyber Essentials, you're not allowed to share user accounts. You're not allowed generic accounts. Question 8.7. This question asks, how do you ensure that user accounts are disabled or removed when people leave? So basically this is talking about your HR offboarding process. If someone leaves the business, how are their accounts disabled and removed? Question A7.4 is asking you, how do you ensure that people only have access to do the job that they need to do? So here Cyber Essentials is looking for least privilege access, role-based access, things like that. How do you ensure that people only have the access that they need to do? And then the next section is all about administrative accounts. This section is all about how you use and interact with administrative accounts for your business. So for Cyber Essentials, you are not allowed to use administrative accounts for your day-to-day use. You must have account separation. A separate account for admin, a separate account for user accounts. Then A7.5 is asking you, do you have a formal process for giving administrative access to people? And what is that process? So you need to list and describe what the process is there for actually having that. A7.6 is asking, how do you ensure that your business makes sure that admin accounts are separate? Is there a separation? Basically, you need to be running a low-level account for your day-to-day operations, and then you need a separate admin account going from there for your configuration stuff. A7.7 is asking you, how do you ensure that all your administrative accounts are not used for email and web browsing? So for any administrative accounts that you have within the business, you're not allowed to have email accounts associated with those admin accounts, and you're not allowed to use admin accounts with general web browsing and stuff like that, only for configuration use. Question A7.8 is asking you, how do you formally track who has administrative accounts? This also includes any managed service provider or MSP that you use. You should know who has access to your systems and who has access to your administrative accounts. Question A7.9. Do you review who has access to your administrative accounts? It goes without saying this should be a yes. You should know who has access to what. The next section is password-based authentication. This section is all about passwords and authentication. So question A7.10. So this question is asking you about, how do you go around protecting your accounts from brute force password guessing? So do you use account lockouts? Do you use password throttling, multi-factor authentication, all the above, something different? And then questions A711 is asking you, what technical controls are being used to manage your passwords within the business? Again, this could be multi-factor authentication, minimum password length of 12 characters with no maximum length, or minimum password length of 8 characters with the use of some kind of common known password list, something like that. But all the options available can be found within the Cyber Essentials IT requirements document that we've discussed, and you can find in the link below the video and see what you need to use. Question A712 asks you to explain or describe how you ensure people use strong and unique passwords within the business. So this could be through security awareness training, bulletins, things like that. Question A713 is asking you, do you have a process for when you believe an account or a password has been compromised? Ideally, this should be a yes. Something like you change the password, known for anything that has been compromised, and go from there. Question A714 is asking you, do all of your cloud-based systems use multi-factor authentication? This should be a yes again, and it should be turned on for all users, both low-level users and administrative users. A715 says, if you said no to that previous question, is this because the cloud service doesn't support multi-factor authentication? And if that is the case, then you need to list that cloud service that doesn't support multi-factor authentication just in the notes. A716 asks, have you enabled multi-factor authentication for all your administrators which are in the cloud? This should be a yes. So for Microsoft 365, for Google, things like that, any admin accounts should be enabled for multi-factor authentication. Then A717 is asking, have you done the same for all your users? And is multi-factor authentication enabled for all the users within the cloud? Again, for Azure, Google, Zero, everything like that, you need multi-factor authentication turned on. Then finally, we're on to the last section, malware protection. This is a quick section, you'll be glad to know. So for A8.1, it asks, have you enabled and configured anti-malware software for all your devices? So for this one, option A should always be selected for desktops, laptops, servers, and etc. Then if you have listed mobile devices in scope as well, you also need to select option B. So for question 8.2, if all your devices have anti-malware software installed, are they configured and kept up to date? Now this should be a yes, it should be turned on, they should be getting kept up to date and going from there. A8.3, if your anti-malware software is installed and it is configured to block or access to malicious websites, question A8.3, is anti-malware software which is installed, is it configured to block access to malicious websites? So if you access something malicious or something bad on the internet, do you get blocked? That should be a yes. Then we're on to A8.4. So this question is only valid if you selected option B from A8.1, and it's asking you, have your mobile devices been configured to only use App Store access and signed applications? A8.5, again, it's only valid if you selected option B from the previous question, but it's saying, have you made sure that all your mobile devices are configured to use trusted applications only? Again, this should only be a yes. And then that's it. That's it for all the questions. Once you've got ready and you've completed the self-assessment, you click submit within the portal, that submits the answers. You then have to fill in the declaration details. The point of contact in the business will sign the life away, saying everything that is in the self-assessment is correct. That is submitted. Then the certification body will receive your submission. They'll go through, they'll mark the certificate or the assessment. If it's all good, you'll get certified. If there's any questions or queries, they'll push that certification back to you. You go through, you update it, you tweak it, resubmit it. The certification body will then go through, remark it again, and then hopefully you'll be submitted and you'll get certified, and that's it. So I hope this has been informative for you. If you've got any questions about Cyber Essentials, or ISME Cyber Assurance, or anything else that's been in this video, do leave some comments in below the video, and yeah, we'll get in touch. So until next time, thanks very much.